coronavirus pandemic has wreaked havoc across the world. This unprecedented health crisis and the economic crisis has not just changed the world but also affected the Indian economy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given a clarion call to all the people to become self-reliant or Atmanirbhar. He has said that India has the potential to not just fight the COVID-19 battle but also emerge as a global leader after this.
The 5 pillars of Atmanirbhar Bharat are economy, infrastructure, system, vibrant demography and demand. This is all being done to enable the resumption of economic activities without being dependent on any other country.
But amid this debate of becoming Atmanirbhar, there is widespread call to boycott Chinese products. Now, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan basically means that companies will start manufacturing more items without being dependent on other countries like China.
It also means going vocal for local. There have been several reports of companies and industries being shifting from China to India.
The economy is already in a very poor condition due to COVID-19. The India-China relations have worsened and deteriorated because of the over 7-week standoff along the line of actual control. Public demands and calls for boycotting Chinese goods and products have also intensified in recent times.
Indian government has banned 59 Chinese apps including TikTok, which had a huge market in India. JSW Group Managing Director Mr. Parth Jindal has recently announced that he will bring Chinese imports from $400 million to zero in the next 2 years.
But the question is it really possible to boycott Chinese goods and services totally? Let's first understand when can we actually boycott China and what is the step ahead to move towards Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan.
Yes, it is a fact that Indian economy is heavily dependent on Chinese investment. So, without a proper alternative and viable and effective strategy, will banning and boycotting Chinese product, goods and services impact India more than China?
But it is difficult to boycott Chinese products with the Made in China labels unless we have a proper strategy to increase the Made in India labels. These Chinese products are present everywhere, from toys to phones that we use, to garments, consumer accessories, fashion, medicines and so much more. They're also present on the digital platforms of the country, the OTT platforms, e-commerce industries, car components and so much more.
These are present everywhere because Chinese products and services are available at cheaper price. Now, this cheap labor also hugely contributes to cheaper Chinese products. Raw materials are also an important factor in total cost of the product.
Chinese firms invest in bulk purchases for the bulk production to cut down on the tremendous cost of production. China is known as the world's factory because of its efficient business ecosystem. Now, this business ecosystem comprises of a network of suppliers, distributors, manufacturers, government agencies and customers.
Everyone here has a key and fixed role to play in the whole production process, and it's all time-bound process and activity. Business loans are easily available to bigger companies and industries which can provide financial boost to manufacturing sector.
The Chinese firms have received massive criticism for their lower compliance with the environment protection laws and the health and safety guidelines. China has been successful over the years in averting these additional costs that later add up to the company's expenditure bill.
Additionally, Chinese companies ignore all the environmental laws, guidelines and rules, and this allows Chinese firms to cut down the waste management costs. Next, China follows a value-added tax system, tax which is charged only on the value added to the products, services and materials at every stage of its further manufacturing and distribution. Further, China exempts all the goods and services on exports of value-added tax system.
In simpler terms, these companies enjoy a VAT exemption or a rebate policy. Now, these factors help in keeping the cost of production low and also attract investors and companies who are looking forward to produce low-cost goods.
Also, technological advancement in terms of machinery and industrial resources helped these factories in exporting products to other countries at a price that is either below the host country's market price or its cost of production.
Why is Made in China popular in India? The Chinese products have been successful in flooding the Indian market with products that are comparatively 10 to 70% cheaper than the Indian products. However, the quality and durability of these products have been a point of contention.
But several reasons such as bulk availability at lower prices and varieties to choose makes way for the Chinese products in India. These factors make the Chinese goods attractive in the eyes of the Indian dealers and businessmen who ultimately want to profit from running a business.
Most importantly, no Indian is forced to buy the Chinese products. However, there is still a considerable demand because these Chinese products are cheaper than the locality manufactured products.
Why boycott Chinese products movement will be difficult in India?
Let's understand the trade deficit amid India's limited production capabilities. China has emerged as the largest exporter of consumer goods. The trade deficit between the two countries is the largest among global trading partners.
India imports 7 times more than it exports to China. In 2018 and 19, India's exports to China were mere $16.7 billion, while imports were $70.3 billion, and that left a trade deficit of more than $53.6 billion.
As per the data released by the Indian government's Ministry of Commerce and Trade, China has a share of 5.08% in India's exports during the year 2018-19 and had a share of 13.8% in India's imports during the same year. The data also suggests that China's exports to India constitute 2 to 4% of its entire exports. This means that China can easily substitute India for any other country and export goods to that country, and this would potentially not harm China's economy.
On the other hand, since India imports from China in large quantities, it will not be easy for India to find a replacement for Chinese goods at a comparatively low cost. The task of mass boycotting of Chinese products is feasible only when India has a substitute source which can match the cost and bulk availability of Chinese products.
Now, China is one of India's key trading partners. According to a recent India Today report, India's largest imports from China include that of electronic goods, nuclear reactors and machinery, steel and chemicals.
Notably, after China, India's largest imports come from United States, Saudi Arabia and UAE, a total of which reportedly account for what China alone sells to India. Imports from China mainly include consumer durable goods such as electronics products, plastic goods, smartphones, solar cells, pharmaceutical drugs, industrial goods, car components, footwear, sports equipment, toys, among several others.
Now, data suggests that India's imports of electrical and electronic equipments from China stood at $19.97 million in 2019. In 2018, the imports of the same goods, the largest segment, stood at $22 billion, clocking over 50% of India's total requirement of the electrical and electronic equipments.
Chinese firms have established a strong foothold in Indian smartphone market. The 4 big companies dominating nearly 60% of the industry are China-based brands like Xiaomi, Vivo, Realme and Oppo.
The country's toy industry has also been penetrated by the Chinese products. In the period between 2001 to 2012, the import of Chinese products into the toy industry grew by 25.21%. It is also expected that the toy industry will expand even further.
On the other hand, 30% of India's automobile components demands are met by China. Additionally, the products made by Indian companies contain components that come from China or use Chinese machinery to make them. Thus, some of the key industries of Indian economy are either partially or entirely dependent on China.
Now let's talk about the Indian private companies with Chinese investments. According to Union Railway and Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, the foreign direct investment from China during the period 2015 to 2019 stood at $1.8 billion. A foreign direct investment is an investment made by a firm or an individual in one country based on the business interests located in another country.
Automobiles, electrical equipment, book printing, services and electronics have been the top 5 sectors attracting Chinese investments. As per the Gateway House report of 2020, Chinese tech investors have put an estimated $4 billion into Indian startups.
Over a period of 5 years, over 18 of India's 30 unicorns are now Chinese funded. These include Snapdeal, Hike, Zomato, Swiggy, Oyo, Paytm, and much more. These are vested with Chinese interests of varying degrees.
According to the reports, Indian venture capitalists and financiers, although wealthy individuals and families, are not in a position to make $100 million commitments needed to finance startups through their early losses. As per reports, Paytm incurred a loss of Rs 3,690 crore in financial year 2019, while Flipkart lost 3,837 crore over the year, which leaves Western and Chinese investors as dominant players in power in the Indian startup ecosystem and space.
China's dominance in the Indian digital marketing sector with Chinese investments constitute about 50% of the top app downloads. These include web browsers, data sharing apps, and social media apps. Recently, banned app TikTok, the video app, had about 200 million subscribers and had overtaken YouTube in India. Similarly, Alibaba and ByteDance dominate the US penetration of Google, Amazon, and Facebook in India.